Jones, please. Nigel Jones.
In one of his last desperate acts as Prime Minister, will Tony Blair sign the EU Reform Treaty and sell Britain down the river?
In his last desperate act, one of his last desperate acts as Prime Minister, will Tony Blair sign the EU Reform Treaty and sell Britain down the river? Peter Hitchens.
Well, it's already so far down the river, I don't know whether there's very much left to be sold. But I don't know. I think that he would like to, and he has longed to since he came into office, for instance, he was very, very anxious to abolish the pound and take us into the euro and so abolish our economic independence, which is one of the few things which remains to us. And almost all the political class would like to continue with this process of ever closer union, which we agreed to in 1972 and which our political class have lied about ever since, by claiming that this was a common market, it was all economic, it had nothing to do with politics. And they continue to lie to us.
What do the four red lines mean in that case? The four red lines
they mean hold on to the salami slicer for a moment because we're in political difficulty at home. They mean just for now can you lay off because it's not a good time, but come back later in another form and we'll give it to you. That's the way it goes. Each time we have one of these conferences, we lose a little more. And we find that suddenly we can't control another part of what we do. Quite a lot of acts of Parliament, the Disability Discrimination Act recently, the Data Protection Act, are actually European Commission directives, simply rewritten and then put through Parliament. I think Boris will confirm that about 80% of the legislation that goes through our Parliament actually originates in Brussels. And that is the state we're already in. We are a subject province of a European superstate with a few remaining tiny little areas of independence which we just about preserve. There's not much left to go. And if this conference doesn't get rid of it, another one will. If you don't like it, the only thing to do is to leave. But none of these people will say so. They're not interested in national independence or liberty or anything important. They're interested in being in the political class.
Tony McNulty.
To go back to the question, rather than Peter's little knee-jerk, well, we better do the anti-EU rant here now because the programme's come to a close. I don't think he will sell the UK down the river. I think the discussions, as laid out in the press up to now, the discussions with Gordon Brown have been very, very strong, probably one of the strongest set of conditions going into a council. And I don't think we'll get the European Constitution by the back door. Certainly in my own area, Judicial and Home Affairs, we are very, very strong. We are not about to go to qualified majority vote in, yes, cooperation on police, on terror and things like that, but not the cessation of power over to Brussels. So we'll see what happens over the next couple of days, but I am strongly convinced that there will not be, as you suggested in your question, some deal that sails the country down the river.
Okay. Christopher Hitchens.
It seems to me somewhat preposterous to say that if you join a common currency, you lose your economic independence. Has France lost its economic independence? Has Germany lost its economic independence? Has Ireland, where I was at the weekend, lost its independence? What economic independence did it have when it had the punt, for example? How does that make you economically independent? It seems to me to be nonsensical.
But what about this treaty that's being negotiated now?
I have no idea.
Right?
As Maynard Keynes put it, he who controls the currency controls the country. It's very simple. If you don't control your interest rates in your central bank, you don't control your country.
You, sir.
On the red line is just a load of spin to prevent, or in his desperation to avoid a referendum.
Shirley Williams?
I probably disagree with everybody once again. First of all, I say directly that I think if we're going to actually deal with some of the hugest issues facing us, we can't do it entirely on our own. I find it rather strange that we've got all this conversation about selling our sovereignty down the river. A long time ago, we went a very long way to sell our sovereignty to the United States. That's where we made defence agreements. That's where we agreed that the dollar has for years and years determined effectively British interest rates on the level of the British pound, much more than the euro has done, because we're not, it's no good saying cobblers, it's absolutely true. We had a huge loan from the United States, which we took. It put us into very considerable dependence on them. And if you don't believe that, then you have to explain our position on the Iraq War, our position on Afghanistan, our position on thing after thing. Now, I admire the United States, I lived there for many years, but it isn't any good pretending that we're in some peculiar way selling our national independence to the European Union. Incidentally, the very measure that it should be most admired by Peter Hitchens, which was the creation of the single European market, was effectively the creation of Mrs. Thatcher, who agreed to more qualified majority voting in the European Union than anything or any minister has since.
That was the deal.
That's just true.
That
was the deal.
That was the deal. And she fell into that trap.
That deal.
She gave away the sovereignty. Look, national sovereignty is about things like having greengrocers prosecuted for selling bananas by the pound. That's when you discover that somebody else is running your own country.
I thought they decided not to do that.
They did.